One NPC on screen. Best gaming CPU available today drops to 45 FPS. Devs are trying to make the hardware fit the game instead of making the game fit the hardware. Notice how a game like The Last of Us Part 2 or God of War can still look graphically comparable to stuff made in 2024 and can be really well optimized at the same time. Both of those games got PS5 patches for 60 FPS without any frame generation or stupid upscaling that makes the game blurry, as I need money from YouTube ads. Why is terrible optimization so prevalent in days where we have such powerful hardware? I just don't get it. Oh my god, banger comment. Thanks for all the love, guys. From comments in YouTube, Twitter, especially Reddit, the sentiment that modern graphics are stagnating or even deteriorating is rather prevalent. So, is this a real pathological phenomenon, or are these people just the vocal minority? To answer this question, let us take a brief look at some features or characteristics of modern game rendering and understand why people are mad at it. First, let's talk about TAA. If you don't know what anti-aliasing is, it's simple. Aliasing refers to the blocky Minecraft-esque stair-stepping effect that is inevitable on a computer image. It is inevitable because a computer screen is composed of pixels, and pixels are just squares. Now, anti-aliasing is the process used to mask or reduce the jaggies on images. So anti-aliasing roughly means, no squares. Older anti-aliasing techniques include MSAA, FXAA, SMAA, and so on. These days, almost all modern games use temporal anti-aliasing. This technique specifically eliminates jaggies by leveraging information from multiple frames over time. Now, of course, the actual process is more complicated than that. It's only a very brief summary, but going deeper would mean a really long video. And also, I'm not a computer graphics expert. So if you're curious, you can watch Digital Foundry's video on TAA. But in general, TAA is very fast, especially compared to methods like MSAA. Turning TAA on barely reduces performance. In addition, it applies to all areas of the image, whereas MSAA omits some elements of the image. What's up, gamers? So I was editing the video and I found out that I did a pretty piss-poor job of explaining what the difference between TAA and no AA or other methods, what they look like. So I got to fuck TAA, and by the way, I can say fuck now because I found out I can't monetize my second channel yet, so I have to live in poverty for years to come. Okay, just joking. Anyways, so in this subreddit, you can find a lot of links that show you these websites that can help you to see the differences between having TAA on, no AA, and then the subreddit also includes things like in motion or stationary. So one thing you'll notice about TAA is that, let's go to Red Dead Redemption. Yep. So this is a stationary image, okay? Stationary, it says it right here. This is a stationary image. And you see, with TAA medium, it actually looks pretty good. It's a bit blurrier compared to like TAA off. But still, it looks pretty nice, right? Like, it's reasonably sharp. It's not as sharp as no AA, but no AA looks like it's deep fried, right? Like if you like, look at that. Yeah, it looks deep fried with dithering and stuff like that. With TAA on, bam, it looks pretty nice, right? All right, so now let's look at Red Dead Redemption 2 with TAA on, stationary versus in motion. Okay, let's do that. And now you see with TAA stationary, just like the image I showed you before, it looks sharp enough, right? But when you move, oh my god, what's happening? And if YouTube's compression is doing a bad job showing you the difference, let me zoom in. Well, can I zoom into a different place? Okay, maybe not. I'm not too experienced with this website, okay? But as you can see, when you're moving, let's look at this tree here. It looks really blurry. So TAA only really looks good when you're standing still. And, the point of playing a video game is to play it, you move the character. So TAA, when you play the game, it blurs the image to an insane degree, okay? And just for some bonus information, Trepang 2, this game includes FXAA as well. So let's take a look at the differences between FXAA and TAA. So as you can see, in general, like even in motion, TAA still looks like a more stable, more refined image. With FXAA on, you still see a lot of good old pixelization, right? So with TAA on, like the fences here, they look pretty well, right? Like they look pretty good. When you're far away, like you literally can't find like a square, right? But with FXAA, you can see that there's still a lot of aliasing, right? Here. Yeah, the fences, they're quite pixelated. Like, honestly, like from my experience, FXAA doesn't really do that much. Like, it's a pretty obvious difference. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, TAA, the image looks pretty clean, and then with FXAA, it's sharper, but it's definitely aliased, alright? So that's the difference between TAA and other AA methods. So basically what I'm trying to say is TAA looks good only when stationary. And in motion, it really does look very poor. Another thing I would like to highlight is how unplayable modern games are with TAA turned off. So let's take a look at this comparison in Cyberpunk here. Let's equalize the good old resolution. So both images are 1080p, but one with TAA forced off. I believe it's forced off by editing the config files in the game, so you can't really turn TAA off in the game menus. You'd have to change the game files for that. These two images aren't exactly the same, but they are in motion, so, you know, like, don't be too tough on those benchmarking guys or, like, the guys who are taking the screenshots, alright? So with TAA on, you see it's quite blurry. It really is. It's 1080p, you know, but when you zoom in, honestly, even if you don't zoom in, okay, like, I can only record in 1080p because my computer is kind of bad, but still, like, on my monitor, that's 1440p, it looks blurry. It really does look blurry, because it is in motion with TAA on, right? So when you force it off, it's definitely sharper, but you'd see a lot of artifacts, okay? So everything is aliased, which is, you know, normal because there's no anti-aliasing, but you can see that the trees, they're half resolution, okay? So, you know, even in other games with anti-aliasing turned off, the foliage, the trees, it doesn't look this bad. You can take a look at like GTA on GTA 5 on PS4. That game only uses FXAA, but the foliage in GTA 5 looks better than Cyberpunk when Cyberpunk is not using anti-aliasing. And also, in this screenshot, the character isn't showing his hair. I think that's a he, right? I don't know. But in Cyberpunk with anti-aliasing turned off, the hair looks very dithered. It also looks kind of half resolution. The reason why developers use these low resolution assets like foliage or hair in modern games is that it saves on performance. And also with TAA turned on, you really can't see the half resolution nature of the foliage anyways, because it's already kind of blurry. It's a stable looking enough image, you know, but it's very blurry. So TAA kind of cleans up these low quality foliage. So it saves on performance and it doesn't look too bad. That's why the developers use it. I don't think they are like very lazy, right? Like there's no point in speculating how hardworking they are. You know, I've never worked as a developer, right? But the point is, TAA also helps alleviate the problems with performance saving assets. Okay, one more thing I forgot to mention, and that's ghosting. I swear this is going to be the last scuffed live commentary I'm going to shove to your face. But anyways, okay, so let's look at The Matrix Awakens. It's a tech demo for Unreal Engine 5, so you'd think, you know, for a tech demo, it should really look amazing because it doesn't have to do anything in terms of gameplay, right? And so with TAA on, of course, as you've seen in past comparisons, it does clean up the image a lot at the cost of, I think, blurring it. So this is how it looks when static. Okay, when static, like, oh my god, look at all that aliasing, man. But now with TAA on, bam! It looks slightly blurry, but it's fine, right? But what about in motion? Not only does motion make the image even more blurry than this one, it ghosts. You know, can you see all these, like, past... It's like kind of like an anime effect, right? So in this case, I think the camera is moving towards the right. Like, you move your mouse towards the right, and then the pass frames, the information from the pass frames, actually is retained to the current image. So that's basically the principle of temporal anti-aliasing, right? And now that information is showing on the screen right now. You can see that there's like, I think 3, right? 3 to 4 like ghost character models to the left of the actual one. And I know, like, maybe for some of you guys, maybe you'd think, it's not really a big issue. Maybe you're not looking at the peripherals of the main character when you play video games. You like to look at, I don't know, this tree right here. But some people are sensitive to it, and some people are kind of bothered by it, alright? So that's why people don't like ghosting, or rather, that's why people don't like TAA. Okay, it's the blur in motion, and it's also the ghosting and flickering artifacts. When you're far away and using a slower input method like a controller, TAA is amazing. However, when you're sitting close to your 1080p PC monitor, which is still the norm to this day, and using a mouse and keyboard, the pitfalls of TAA become readily apparent. As a result, it leads to varying interpretations of TAA. Some say it's a must in modern graphics, and some say it causes motion sickness. To me, a PC gamer on a 1440p screen, TAA is great in games like Baldur's Gate 3, where the game is slow and fast motion is rare. But in first-person or faster games, like Cyberpunk, TAA gets really annoying. The first-person perspective exacerbates TAA's blurriness. Dashing and flicking with your mouse also causes excessive blur and ghosting. The most irritating thing is, TAA is forced in most modern games. Even if you can edit the config file to turn it off, the game is designed with TAA in mind, so things like reflections, trees, shadows, hair may look insufferable when TAA is turned off. In this case, I would still regard those games as forcing TAA, simply because the alternative is unusable. I recognize that TAA is the only effective and cheap way of removing jaggies, but designing the entire game around it is a bit too far. Some people may actually prefer a more aliased but clearer and artifact-free image, and developers really should provide alternatives such as SMAA for those players. Let us now talk about Raytracing. Despite being released into the wild in around 2019, the technology is still too intensive for the everyday gamer's GPUs. Don't get me wrong, it does look amazing, but the past lighting techniques look great already. So severing your frame rate in half just to make the lights more realistic seems like a fool's errand. If you have the performance headroom to ray trace, why not run the game at a higher resolution or higher frame rate? Furthermore, only selective cards can use the feature. Older Nvidia cards, such as the GTX 10 series and before, don't support the feature, so these GPUs literally cannot run games that require ray tracing. AMD cards flat out suck at it. I use a low-end AMD card, the RX 7600, so it makes sense that I can't ray trace much. But even with a top-of-the-line AMD card, turning on ray tracing sacrifices an insane portion of performance, and the visual gains have absolutely no hope of justifying the frame rate loss. As for Intel cards, they have enough problems already, so let's just leave them alone. In my opinion, after so many years of ray traced games, the graphical improvements of the feature is finally getting apparent enough, meaning that there is significant difference in graphical fidelity between ray tracing off and on. Examples include Indiana Jones with full RT and Cyberpunk with Pathtracing. It is obvious that with ray tracing, games can stop relying on bare-bones tricks such as ambient occlusion or baked-in lighting to add depth to the image. However, while the software is looking great, the hardware, which are the GPUs, are still not powerful enough to render ray-traced games at optimal frame rates. And so we have to rely on more software solutions, such as upscaling and frame generation. Speaking of upscaling, can you count how many S's I'm going to say? TSR, FSR, XESS, DLSS. These are all performance-enhancing techniques called upscaling. The general principle of the process is to input a low-resolution image into an upscaling algorithm, and then produce a high-resolution final image. Different methods use different approaches to upscale. For example, DLSS is only compatible with RTX 20 series cards or newer because it requires tensor cores to upscale images with deep learning, while FSR and TSR are compatible with all modern GPUs because they are using algorithms that don't use deep learning. XeSS is a mix of both. It's quite complicated, but the gist of it is that XeSS uses deep learning and looks better on Intel GPUs, and on other GPUs, XeSS doesn't run or look as good. Now, that's a lot of boring technical information, which is one of my gripes on modern graphics because even to a pseudo-enthusiast like me, this stuff gets really confusing. Imagine what a layman would feel like when they see so many X's and S's. The upscaled image often doesn't look as good as the native image, but it does increase your FPS, so I think it's a fair trade. On my monitor, FSR on performance mode definitely looks better than a 720p no upscaling image, even during motion. So, what's the problem with upscaling? In my opinion, upscaling itself isn't really a problem. People are mad at the bad optimization of games. Stalker 2 is a prime example of this. When it launched, you needed an RTX 3080 or an RX 6800 to run the game at 1440p medium settings at 60 FPS. Not only that, it is an unstable 60 FPS that would drop frames and have inconsistent frame times, so a laggy and less responsive experience. For reference, these are mid to high-end GPUs that are stronger than something like an Xbox or PS5. As a result, players feel as if they are forced to use upscaling to run new games smoothly, and hence they are forced to experience upscaling artifacts. Some might say that upscaling is just a crutch that allows lazy devs to leave their games unoptimized. I think that's not quite fair. I'm not a game developer, but I've programmed a bit in high school, and damn, it was hard for me. I'm not really a math or logic kind of guy, so if FizzBuzz is challenging to me already, I can't imagine how difficult game development would be. Whether upscaling is a crutch or not also depends on a game-by-game basis. Therefore, I'd say upscaling is still a great technology as long as it isn't forced and the game itself is relatively well optimized. Frame generation, however, is a more extreme way of quote-unquote doubling performance. Well, actually, now they're saying they can triple or quadruple it. Now, frame generation is a technology that inserts a generated frame in between traditionally rendered frames. Again, DLSS frame gen uses deep learning, while FSR frame gen doesn't. So DLSS only works on RTX cards, FSR works on all modern cards. Graphically speaking, the generated frames artifacts are unnoticeable because they are put in between cleaner traditional frames. The downside, however, is increased input latency. That's because the fake frame is generated after the latest frame is rendered. It is an extra process that's done after rendering the latest frame, increasing input delay. Some might say that this is a crutch used by lazy devs in blah blah blah. You know, they say the same thing that they say for upscaling. This time though, I want to rant a bit more on frame gen. It is, just like The Rock said, the most useless piece of shit I've ever seen. Why? Because it's counterintuitive. The reason why a higher frame rate is desirable is because of the increased responsiveness. Frame gen, however, increases input latency. So let's say you were shooting an enemy in cyberpunk. With frame generation on, your left mouse button literally takes longer to register. The only upside to this tech is the objects in motion and aiming with your mouse looks smoother. But then there's another problem. And that is a better and cross-platform alternative already exists. Motion blur. I know this sounds crazy, but hear me out. Motion blur doesn't increase input latency, but it does make mouse movements look smoother. Now you might say, but motion blur blurs the image. And yes, you are right. But if you wanted a clean image, you really wouldn't stick a generated frame in between the real ones, now would you? The target audience for frame gen are those who are fine with more input lag, but are somehow mindful with image clarity in motion. But the reason why you need image clarity to begin with is to respond to the image, which frame gen is detrimental against. Okay, I'm getting carried away. What I'm saying is, motion blur has a similar effect to frame gen without adding input latency. So frame gen is very redundant. Still, although the existence of frame gen in a PvP shooter game pisses me off to astronomical degrees, it is a toggleable feature. You can turn it off. No games force frame gen really, so that's a good thing. As long as GPU makers don't market generated frames as real frames, then everything is well. Wait a minute, an RTX 5070 has 4090 levels of performance? Jensen, take my money now! Nvidia, and sometimes AMD too, are using frame gen benchmark results to artificially make their new products look better. While it is true that the new 50 series RTX cards support multi-frame gen, meaning to generate 2 or 3 frames in between 2 traditional frames, doing so increases latency even more, so the gameplay experience on these two bars are not comparable. The gray bar actually feels better to control because of the decreased input lag, while the green bar, although higher, it only looks smoother. It doesn't play smoother. I know both bars are using frame gen, but the green one is using 4x frame gen, while the gray one is only 2x. Basically, the more frames are generated, the higher the input lag. You get the point, okay? In the past, 1080p medium settings 60 FPS is the exact same across all GPUs. But with DLSS and FSR upscaling and frame gen, it gets harder to measure the value of a GPU. So in the end, it is always the consumers that get absolutely obliterated. Going back to software, let's talk about Unreal Engine 5. From my very reliable and scientific experience of watching Digital Foundry videos and scrolling through Reddit, the online sentiment is that Unreal Engine 5 games are stuttery, unoptimized, and they all look the same. By same, I mean blurry images, flickery graphics, and ghosting effects. It is so bad that when you look at an Indiana Jones benchmark on YouTube, you know, a game running on id Tech 7 and has nothing to do with Unreal 5, people in the comments still complain about Unreal. Now the truth is I don't really have much experience playing Unreal 5 games because I've only played Marvel Rivals. You know, I don't particularly feel like splurging on video games that my computer cannot run, okay? Sue me. Anyways, if you don't know a thing about Rivals, let me introduce you to it. It is a game developed by NetEase, a Chinese developer that practically specializes in free-to-play mobile online games. They are monetarily driven to optimize their games and graphics as much as possible, so that they can milk your wallet through your 8-year-old Android brick of a phone. Logically, you would predict they know a thing or two about optimization, right? Even so, Unreal Engine 5 proves to be too great of a challenge for these developers. With Unreal features enabled, such as Lumen GI, I get like 40 to 50 FPS on Rivals. For reference, Cyberpunk on hardware and boxed performance settings never drops below 60 FPS on my PC. A free-to-play shooter game running worse than Cyberpunk because of Unreal Engine 5. Of course, there are some optimized Unreal 5 games out there, but when considering the big picture, you really can't fault people for associating Unreal 5 with bad performance. I've babbled about graphics for long enough, so now is a perfect time to tell you that everything I've said in this video doesn't matter. In 2024's Game Awards, Balatro, poker, got into the nominees for Game of the Year award. Then you might think, it's just like a funny nominee, right? It's never gonna win. These hyper-realistic AAA games like Wukong, Final Fantasy, or Elden Ring would win, right? No! Astrobot, literally PS5 Mario, won! Don't get me wrong, Astrobot looks amazing, but it has no fancy lumen, nanite, or raytracing at all. It is just a high-resolution, 60 FPS experience on the PS5. Digital Foundry ranked Star Wars Outlaws, Hellblade 2, and Indiana Jones as the top 3 games with best graphics in 2024. Now, Outlaws is, not quite a very good game. Hellblade looks and runs great, but from what I've read and seen, it's more of an interactive movie. So that leaves Indiana Jones. Only 1 out of the top 3 best-looking games are publicly recognized as good games. That really is sufficient proof that graphics don't matter. Like, I can play a Game of the Year nominee on my phone. And you know why? Gameplay. That's the name of the game. Nintendo has been publishing good games on the Switch since 2017. In terms of hardware, the Switch uses a mobile mid-range chipset from 10 years ago. Yet they still made games like Mario Odyssey, 2 Zelda games, and many more. Graphics, well, it's cool to have, but as long as it is serviceable and the game performance is stable, people really won't complain about it. At the end of the day, graphics have almost no correlation to how fun or engaging a game is. Last but not least, I would like to end this video on a more positive note. Although the state of modern graphics seems grim, there still exists plenty of optimized and good-looking games, especially indie ones. Even if suddenly all new games suck and have piss poor performance, you can always play some older games. I'm sure none of you here has finished your Steam library yet. Heck, I gotta play some Baldur's Gate now. Thanks for watching and goodbye.